The sound of gunshots echoed across the dusty plains as Willow Kincaid urged her exhausted horse forward, the animal's labored breathing matching her own panicked gasps. Her once fine dress was torn and stained with the red dust of the Arizona Territory, her golden hair falling loose from its pins as she glanced over her shoulder at the horizon behind her empty for now. But she knew they weren't far behind. It was 1878, and the life Willow had known in Boston was nothing but a distant memory as she fled across the unforgiving landscape of the American frontier. The setting sun cast long shadows across the terrain, painting the scattered mesas in blood-red hues that mirrored the danger at her back. Just when her horse began to stumble beneath her, Willow spotted a small ranch nestled in a protective curve of the landscape, smoke rising from its chimney in a promise of life and sanctuary. Her horse practically collapsed as she slid from the saddle in front of the modest homestead. The door swung open before she could knock, revealing a tall man with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. A rifle rested comfortably in his calloused hands. "State your business," he said, his voice deep and cautious. Willow swallowed hard. "My name is Willow Kincaid." "I need shelter, please." Her voice cracked with dehydration and fear. "I'm being pursued." The man's eyes narrowed as he scanned the horizon behind her. "By whom?" "Men who want what isn't theirs to take," she replied, one hand instinctively moving to the small leather pouch hidden in the folds of her skirt. After a moment's consideration, the man stepped aside. "Come in. I'm Knox Sutherland." As she crossed the threshold into his home, Willow spoke the only truth that mattered in that moment. "I'm only here for safety." The cowboy's lips curved slightly as he closed and bolted the door behind her. "Stay for joy and call it home," he replied, though his eyes remained wary. "But first, tell me what kind of trouble you've brought to my doorstep." Willow stood in the center of Knox's modest cabin, taking in the sparse yet tidy surroundings. A pot of something that smelled delicious bubbled over the fire, making her suddenly aware of her gnawing hunger. "My father was a banker in Boston," she began, accepting the cup of water Knox offered. "He discovered evidence of embezzlement against his partners. Before he could report it, Her voice faltered. "They killed him and made it look like an accident. I found his hidden documents and fled west." Knox's expression remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes. "And these men followed you all this way?" Willow nodded. "The money they stole is substantial enough to make the journey worthwhile. They're ruthless, Mr. Sutherland." "Knox," he corrected, moving to the window to scan the darkening landscape. "We're not much for formalities out here." "I can't stay long," Willow said, clutching her cup with trembling hands. "A day or two, just until my horse is rested and I can continue to California." Knox turned to study her, taking in her fine clothes, despite their current state, and the refined way she carried herself. City folk don't tend to survive long in these parts traveling alone, especially not with men hunting them. "I don't have much choice," she replied, lifting her chin defiantly. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Everyone has choices, Miss Kincaid. They just might not be the ones you'd prefer." He gestured to a chair at his small table. "Sit, eat, we'll talk more after." The stew was simple but nourishing, filled with beans, jerky, and wild onions. Willow hadn't realized how famished she was until the first spoonful touched her lips. She forced herself to eat slowly, aware of Knox watching her from across the table. "You handle a horse well enough," he observed. "Not your first time riding. My mother's family owned a country estate. I spent summers there as a child." Willow set down her spoon. "Mr. Sutherland Knox, I don't want to bring danger to your home. These men have already killed once." "This territory breeds dangerous men like rattlesnakes," Knox replied calmly. "I've dealt with my share." Something in his tone made Willow look at him more carefully. His clothing was simple but well-maintained. The cabin, while basic, showed signs of care. Books lined a small shelf, an unusual sight for a ranch hand. Most telling were his hands calloused from work, yes, but they moved with a deliberate precision that spoke of something beyond ranch work. "You weren't always a rancher," she observed. Knox's expression closed slightly. "Everyone out here is running from something, Miss Kincaid. Some just run farther than others." Before she could press further, the sound of an approaching horse brought Knox to his feet. He moved to the window with the fluid grace of a predator, keeping to the shadows as he peered out. "Stay inside," he commanded, retrieving his rifle before slipping out the door. Willow's heart hammered in her chest as she listened to the muffled conversation outside. After several agonizing minutes, Knox returned. "Just my neighbor, Manuel," he explained, setting the rifle aside. "Checking in. I told him I had a cousin visiting from back east." "Thank you," Willow said, relief washing through her. Knox nodded once. "You should rest. Take the bed, I'll sleep by the fire." When Willow began to protest, he cut her off with a raised hand. "You've been riding hard. Sleep. Morning comes early here." Sleep did not come easily despite her exhaustion. The unfamiliar sounds of the wilderness kept her alert, coyotes howling in the distance, the creak of the cabin settling, and the steady breathing of Knox as he slept on a bedroll near the dying embers of the fire. When she did finally drift off, her dreams were filled with pursuing shadows and her father's voice warning her to run. She woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Knox moving quietly around the cabin. Dawn was just beginning to brighten the eastern sky. "Your horse needs another day," Knox said without preamble when he noticed she was awake. "Left front leg is strained. Pushing him now would leave you stranded." Willow sat up, smoothing her tangled hair. "I can't impose, it's not an imposition, it's common sense." Knox placed a mug of coffee and a plate with cornbread and beans on the small table beside the bed. "Eat. Then I'll show you around. If you're staying, even briefly, you should know the layout." The ranch was modest but well-maintained. A small barn housed Knox's 2 horses and now Willow's exhausted mount. A corral contained a handful of cattle. A chicken coop and vegetable garden completed the homestead. Beyond stretched miles of rugged terrain, beautiful in its stark wildness. "How long have you been here?" Willow asked as they walked the property's perimeter. 5 years, Knox replied. "Was wilderness when I arrived, built everything myself." "Alone?" A muscle in his jaw tightened. "Yes, it must be a lonely life." Knox's eyes met hers. "Solitude and loneliness aren't the same thing, Miss Kincaid. Please call me Willow," she said softly. Something shifted in his expression. "Willow, then." They worked side by side that day, Knox showing her how to feed the chickens and collect eggs, how to check her horse's injured leg, how to identify the plants in his garden that were ready for harvesting. By sunset, her hands were dirty and her muscles ached, but there was a strange satisfaction in the physical labor. "You're a quick study," Knox observed as they prepared supper together. Willow smiled, surprised at how natural it felt. "My father always said adaptability was the most important trait a person could possess." Wise man. He was. Sadness crept into her voice. He didn't deserve what happened to him. Knox was quiet for a moment. Few get what they deserve in this world, good or bad. That evening, as they sat before the fire, Willow found herself sharing more about her life in Boston, her father's work, the dreams she'd once had of teaching mathematics, a subject that had always fascinated her. Knox listened more than he spoke, but gradually revealed pieces of himself as well. He'd fought in the Civil War, had worked as a lawman briefly in Missouri before heading west, seeking something he couldn't quite name. "And did you find it?" Willow asked, watching the firelight play across his features. "Parts of it," he replied, his eyes meeting hers across the flames. Still searching for the rest. The next morning brought dark clouds and the promise of rain, rare and precious in this arid landscape. Knox watched the sky with a mixture of hope and concern. "Your horse is better, but these storms can turn dangerous quickly," he said as they stood on the porch. "Flash floods, washes out the trails." Willow heard what he wasn't saying. "You think I should wait another day?" Knox nodded. "Would be safer." A part of her knew she should press on, that every day increased the chance of her pursuers finding her trail. Yet another part, one that grew stronger with each passing hour, wanted to stay in this unexpected haven she'd stumbled upon. "One more day," she agreed. The rain began mid-morning, a gentle patter that quickly turned into a downpour. They stayed inside, Knox working on mending tack while Willow helped organize his meager collection of books, discovering to her delight several volumes of poetry and scientific texts among the practical guides to ranching and survival. You're an educated man, she observed, running her fingers along the spine of a mathematics treatise. Education and schooling aren't always the same, he replied without looking up from his work. My father believed in books, taught me to value knowledge. Is he still alive? Knox shook his head. Died in '62, pneumonia. I'm sorry, Willow said softly, and your mother followed him a year later, some say from heartbreak, though the doctor called it consumption. His hands stilled momentarily. Your mother, gone when I was very young, I barely remember her. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the sound of rain on the roof and the occasional rumble of distant thunder. There was something intimate about being confined together in the small cabin, the rest of the world washed away by the deluge. As evening approached, the rain showed no signs of abating. Knox prepared a more elaborate meal than usual, rabbit stew with herbs from his garden and biscuits that were surprisingly light for a bachelor's cooking. Where did you learn to cook like this? Willow asked, savoring the flavors. A rare smile touched Knox's lips. Trial and error, mostly error at first. Man gets tired of burnt beans and tough jerky after a while. The warmth of the food and the rhythmic sound of rain created a drowsy contentment. They sat before the fire, closer than they had the previous night. Willow found herself studying Knox's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the tiny scar above his left eyebrow, the way his eyes reflected the dancing flames. You're staring, he said quietly, not looking at her. Willow didn't look away. I'm trying to understand you. Now he turned, their faces mere inches apart. What's to understand? Why a man like you is out here alone? Why you'd risk helping a stranger bring trouble to your door? Knox was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. After the war, I couldn't settle. Tried being a lawman, but the lines between right and wrong kept blurring. Came west looking for something simpler. And did you find it? Sometimes, he admitted. Other times, simplicity feels a lot like emptiness. Willow found herself reaching out, her fingers lightly touching the back of his hand. I understand emptiness. Knox looked down at their hands, then back to her face. Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of kindred spirits despite their different paths. Slowly, deliberately, he turned his hand over, his calloused palm against hers, fingers intertwining. They sat like that, connected by that simple touch, until the fire burned low and the night grew deep around them. Morning brought clearing skies and a decision that could no longer be delayed. Willow's horse was recovered, the trails would soon be passable, and the men pursuing her were still out there. I should go, she said as they stood in the barn, checking her saddle. I've already stayed longer than I intended. Knox nodded, his expression carefully neutral. Where will you head? West still, maybe north first to throw them off my trail. Willow adjusted the small pouch containing her father's documents, now securely sewn into the lining of her dress. I need to get these to someone who can act on them. It's a long journey for a woman alone. She smiled faintly. As you've pointed out, I'm adaptable. Knox was quiet as he helped her prepare, loading her saddlebags with provisions enough for several days' travel. His movements were efficient, but there was a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. You could stay, he said suddenly as she was about to mount. Until winter passes, at least. Willow's heart skipped a beat. I can't ask that of you. You're not asking, I'm offering. Knox's eyes held hers. There's work enough for two here, the cabin's small but... He trailed off, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. It's not just about safety anymore, Willow said softly, understanding what he couldn't quite express. A fleeting smile crossed his face. No, it's not. Before she could respond, the sound of approaching horses shattered the moment. Knox tensed, his hand moving to the revolver at his hip. Get inside, he ordered, his voice suddenly hard. Use the rifle if needed. Knox, now, Willow. She hurried to the cabin, her heart pounding. Through the window, she watched as 3 riders approached. Even at a distance, she recognized one of them, Harrison Wells, her father's former partner and the man who had orchestrated his death. Beside him rode 2 rough-looking men, hired guns with cold eyes. Knox stood his ground as they approached, appearing relaxed, but Willow could see the readiness in his stance. She retrieved the rifle, checking that it was loaded before returning to her position by the window. Morning, gentlemen, Knox called as they drew near. Something I can help you with." Wells, a distinguished-looking man in his 50s with silver-threaded dark hair, smiled thinly. "Perhaps we're looking for a young woman. Blonde, well-spoken, riding a chestnut gelding with a white blaze." "Haven't seen anyone fitting that description," Knox replied evenly. "Not much traffic through these parts," one of the other men snorted. "Then whose horse is that in your corral? Looks like it's got a white blaze to me." Willow's breath caught. Her horse was indeed visible from where they stood. Knox didn't flinch. "That's my horse. Had him 3 years now." Wells dismounted, his movements deliberate. "Mind if we look around? The girl we're seeking is my niece, you see. Ran away after her father's tragic death. Her mind is unstable. We're concerned for her safety." "I mind," Knox said flatly. "This is private property." The two hired guns exchanged glances, their hands drifting toward their weapons. Wells sighed as if disappointed. "Mr. Sutherland, Mr. Sutherland, I assure you we mean no harm. The girl has taken something that belongs to me, family heirlooms of significant value. I simply want them returned." Knox's expression remained impassive. "Like I said, I haven't seen any girl. Now I've got work to attend to. Good day, gentlemen." Wells studied Knox for a long moment, then nodded slightly. "Very well. If you do happen to see her, there's a substantial reward for her safe return." He reached into his coat and produced a folded paper. "A description and where to find us." Knox took the paper without looking at it. "I'll keep an eye out." As the men mounted their horses, the larger of the two hired guns spoke. "Boss, that water barrel's got fresh tracks around it, and those chickens look recently fed." Wells paused. "Indeed, you seem well organized for a man living alone, Mr. Sutherland." "I like order," Knox replied. His hand rested casually near his holster now. Tension crackled in the air. From her vantage point, Willow could see all 4 men preparing for violence. She raised the rifle, knowing she might need to act. The thought of Knox being hurt or worse because of her made her chest constrict painfully. Just as it seemed conflict was inevitable, the distant sound of approaching horses drew everyone's attention. A group of riders appeared on the horizon, 5 men, moving at a steady pace toward the ranch. Wells frowned. "Expecting company, Mr. Sutherland." "That'll be the patrol from Fort Breckenridge," Knox said calmly. "They come through every couple of weeks. Check on the outlying homesteads." Willow wasn't sure if he was bluffing, but the mention of military presence caused a visible shift in Wells's demeanor. He clearly hadn't anticipated complications. "Another time, perhaps," Wells said smoothly, gathering his reins. "Remember what I said about the reward." Knox nodded once, standing motionless as the 3 men rode away, taking a different path than the approaching riders. Only when they were well out of sight did he return to the cabin, finding Willow still by the window, rifle ready. "Was that really a military patrol?" she asked, lowering the weapon. Knox shook his head. "Cattle drivers. They pass through this area regularly. Good timing." "They'll be back," Willow said, her voice hollow. "Wells won't give up. He's killed for those documents once already." "I know." Knox took the rifle from her hands, setting it aside before gently grasping her shoulders. "We need to move quickly. Pack only what you need." Confusion crossed her face. "I'm coming with you," he stated, as if it were the most natural conclusion. "Those men will return with reinforcements once they realize their prey has fled. This place won't be safe for either of us. But your home, your ranch, buildings can be rebuilt. Land will still be here." His eyes softened slightly. "Some things matter more." Willow felt a rush of emotions, gratitude, fear, and something deeper she wasn't ready to name. "I can't ask you to give up everything for me." "You're not asking." Knox's hands slid down to grasp hers. "I'm choosing." They worked quickly, gathering essentials: food, ammunition, tools, and the small items of value Knox had accumulated over the years. Within an hour, both horses were packed and ready. Knox took one last look at the cabin he'd built with his own hands, his expression unreadable. "Where to?" Willow asked as they mounted. Knox pointed northwest. "I have a friend in Wyoming, former lawman. He'll help us get those documents to the right people." "It's a long journey," she said, echoing his earlier words. A rare smile transformed his face. "Good thing we're both adaptable." They rode hard that first day, taking paths only someone intimately familiar with the territory would know. Knox led them through narrow canyons and across ridgelines, constantly watching for signs of pursuit. By nightfall, they had covered significant ground, making camp in a sheltered hollow that offered protection from both the elements and unwanted eyes. As they sat beside a small, carefully shielded fire, Willow found herself studying Knox's face in the flickering light. "You didn't hesitate," she said softly, "to leave everything behind." Knox was quiet for a moment. "Been thinking about moving on for a while now, just needed the right reason." "And I'm that reason." His eyes met hers across the flames. "You could be." Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of possibilities neither had dared consider before. Willow moved closer until their shoulders touched, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "When this is over," she began. "What then?" "One day at a time," Knox replied. "That's all anyone really has." They traveled for 2 weeks, staying off main trails and avoiding settlements when possible. Only once did they spot riders that might have been their pursuers, but Knox's knowledge of the terrain allowed them to slip away undetected. The journey brought them closer in ways Willow hadn't anticipated. She learned to hunt alongside Knox, to read weather patterns, to navigate by stars. In turn, she shared her knowledge of mathematics and literature, often reciting poetry from memory as they rode. In the evenings, their conversations grew deeper, more personal. Knox spoke of his time in the war, the nightmares that still occasionally haunted him, his brief career as a lawman, and the disillusionment that drove him west. Willow told him about her sheltered upbringing, her father's encouragement of her unconventional interest in mathematics, and her dreams of a life defined by more than society's expectations for women. "You'd make a fine teacher," Knox observed one night as she explained a complex mathematical principle using twigs and pebbles. Willow smiled. "Perhaps someday, once these documents are safe and Wells faces justice." "What would you teach, if you could?" "Mathematics, of course. And perhaps astronomy. The way stars move through the heavens follows mathematical principles. There's such beauty in that order." Knox watched her face, animated in the firelight. "You see beauty where others see only numbers." "Just as you see possibilities where others see only wilderness," she replied softly. Their eyes held, and Willow felt her breath catch as Knox reached out to brush a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "Willow," he said, his voice rough with emotion. She leaned into his touch. "Yes." Instead of words, Knox closed the distance between them, his lips finding hers in a kiss that began gently but quickly deepened with weeks of unspoken longing. Willow's arms wound around his neck, drawing him closer as she returned the kiss with equal fervor. When they finally parted, both breathing heavily, Knox rested his forehead against hers. "Been wanting to do that since you first arrived at my door." Willow smiled, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "Even when I was covered in dust and demanding sanctuary." "Especially then," he admitted with a small laugh. "You looked like a warrior queen." They spent that night in each other's arms, their bedrolls combined beneath the vast canopy of stars. In the wilderness, away from society's prying eyes and judgments, they found a freedom neither had experienced before to love openly, honestly, without pretense or constraint. As dawn broke, Knox watched Willow sleeping beside him, her golden hair spread across their makeshift pillow. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine a future beyond mere survival, a future with purpose, with connection, with joy. When Willow's eyes fluttered open, finding his gaze immediately, Knox knew with absolute certainty that he would follow this woman anywhere across deserts, through mountains, into whatever battles lay ahead. They reached Laramie, Wyoming after 3 weeks of hard travel. Knox's friend, a grizzled former marshal named Ethan Daniels, welcomed them warily at first, but warmed considerably when Knox explained their situation. "Wells has a reputation even out here," Daniels confirmed after examining the documents Willow had protected so carefully. "These prove embezzlement, fraud, even point to murder. The federal authorities will be interested." "Can you help us get them to the right people?" Knox asked. Daniels nodded. "Got connections with a federal judge in Denver, man of integrity. Give me 2 weeks to make the arrangements." Those 2 weeks passed in a strange limbo, the tension of waiting balanced against the simple pleasure of being temporarily safe, of sleeping in a real bed, of not constantly looking over their shoulders. Knox and Willow stayed in a small cabin on Daniel's property, enjoying the luxury of privacy and domesticity. One evening, as they sat on the cabin's porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains, Knox took Willow's hand. "When this is over," he began slowly, "I've been thinking about what comes next." Willow turned to study his face. "And what have you decided?" "That's just it, I can't decide alone anymore." Knox's eyes met hers, vulnerability clear in his gaze. "Whatever comes next, I want it to include you." "If you'll have me," warmth bloomed in Willow's chest. "Are you asking me to marry you, Knox Sutherland?" Inelegantly, but yes. A smile tugged at his lips. "I'm not offering much, no home at the moment, no certainties. Just my heart and my hands and a promise to build whatever life you want." Willow leaned forward, pressing her lips gently to his. "I arrived at your door seeking only safety," she whispered against his mouth, "but I found so much more." "Is that a yes?" Knox asked, his arms encircling her waist. "Yes," Willow laughed, joy bubbling up inside her. 1,000 times yes. 2 days later, Daniels returned from town with news. The documents had been delivered to the federal judge, who had immediately issued warrants for Wells and his associates. Telegrams had been sent to law enforcement across the territories. "It's not over," Daniels warned. "Men like Wells have resources, connections. You should stay alert." Knox nodded, his arm protective around Willow's shoulders. "We will, but we're also getting married. Today, if you can find us a preacher." Daniel's eyebrows shot up, then he grinned. "Well now, that's the first sensible thing I've heard you say in years, Knox. I'll fetch Reverend Hayes." They were married that afternoon in Daniel's parlor, with only the Reverend and Daniels as witnesses. Willow wore a simple blue dress purchased in town, and Knox had shaved and donned a clean shirt for the occasion. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, both of them speaking vows that acknowledged the unusual path that had brought them together and the uncertain road ahead. "It's not the wedding I imagined as a girl," Willow admitted as they walked back to their cabin afterward, her hand tucked in Knox's arm. "Disappointed?" he asked, a hint of worry in his voice. She shook her head, smiling up at him. "Not in the least. It was perfect because it was ours." They celebrated their marriage in the privacy of their cabin, discovering new depths to the passion they'd already shared on the trail. As they lay together afterward, planning their future in whispered conversations, a sharp knock at the door jolted them from their contentment. Knox was immediately alert, reaching for his gun as he pulled on his trousers. "Stay back," he murmured to Willow as he approached the door cautiously. It was Daniels, his expression grim. "Wells was spotted in Cheyenne yesterday with 5 men." Willow felt ice form in her veins as she clutched a blanket around herself. "How did he find us?" "Money buys information," Daniels said grimly. "You need to move, tonight," Knox nodded, already gathering their few possessions. "Where?" "Head north. I've got a cabin near the Montana border." "Isolated. Few know about it." Daniels handed Knox a crude map. "I'll spread word you went west to California. Might buy you time." Within an hour, they were riding again, the celebration of their wedding day cut brutally short. They traveled through the night, pushing their horses as hard as they dared, the knowledge that Wells was closing in driving them forward despite exhaustion. "I'm sorry," Willow said as dawn broke, her voice hoarse with fatigue. "This isn't how our marriage was supposed to begin." Knox reached across the space between their horses to grasp her hand briefly. "We're together. That's all that matters." They reached Daniel's northern cabin 3 days later, a sturdy structure nestled in a valley protected by towering pines. It was well stocked with preserved food, firewood, and ammunition, clearly a retreat Daniels had prepared for emergencies. "We can make a stand here if needed," Knox said as they explored the cabin and its surroundings. "Good sight lines, defensible position." Willow nodded, trying to focus on practicalities rather than fear. "How long should we wait?" "A month at least. By then, the federal authorities should have made progress with the case. Wells might be in custody." "And if he isn't," Knox's expression hardened, "then we keep moving." "As long as it takes." The weeks that followed were a strange blend of honeymoon and siege mentality. During the day, they explored the surrounding wilderness, hunted, fished in a nearby stream, and worked to make the cabin more comfortable. Knox began teaching Willow to shoot with greater accuracy, and she proved a quick study. At night, they lost themselves in each other, their passion heightened by the knowledge of how easily they might have never found one another. As their month of waiting neared its end, Willow noticed changes in her body, subtle at first, then unmistakable. Her courses had stopped. Certain scents suddenly became overwhelming. Morning sickness confirmed what she had begun to suspect. "Knox," she said one evening as they sat before the fire, "I'm with child." His head snapped up, eyes wide with wonder and concern. "Are you certain?" She nodded, a mixture of joy and fear washing through her. "About 2 months along, I believe." Knox moved to kneel before her chair, his hands gently cradling her still flat abdomen. "A child," he whispered, awe in his voice, then his expression grew serious. "We can't keep running, not with a baby coming. We need to end this." The next morning, Knox rode to the nearest town with telegraph service, sending messages to Daniels and the federal authorities. When he returned that evening, his expression was grim but determined. "Wells escaped custody in Denver," he told Willow. "Killed a deputy in the process. He's officially a wanted murderer now, with a substantial bounty on his head." Willow's hands instinctively moved to protect her abdomen. "He's still coming for us, isn't he?" Knox nodded slowly. "Daniels thinks so, but every lawman in the territories is looking for him now. And I've asked Daniels to spread word about where we are. You want to draw him out," Willow realized, her voice barely above a whisper, "on our terms, on ground we choose." Knox took her hands in his. "I won't spend our lives looking over our shoulders. Our child deserves better." Willow felt fear twist in her gut, but also a steely resolve. Knox was right, they couldn't run forever, especially not with a child on the way. "What's your plan?" They prepared methodically over the next week, setting up defensive positions and escape routes, stockpiling supplies in a cave half a mile from the cabin as a fallback position. Knox insisted that Willow practice with both rifle and revolver daily, until her aim was sure even under pressure. "If anything happens to me," he told her as they sat cleaning their weapons one evening, "you take the north trail to the cave, then follow the map to Daniel's friend in Helena." Willow set down her rifle. "Nothing is going to happen to you." Knox met her gaze steadily. "Promise me, Willow." She swallowed hard, then nodded. "I promise, but you make me a promise too that you'll do everything in your power to come back to us." Her hand rested on her belly, where the barest hint of a curve was beginning to show. "I promise," he said solemnly, covering her hand with his own. Wells and his men arrived 3 days later, 5 riders approaching openly from the south, making no attempt at stealth. Knox spotted them from the ridge where he'd been hunting and raced back to the cabin. "They're coming," he told Willow tersely. "Remember the plan." Willow nodded, her face pale but determined as she checked her weapons one final time. They had prepared for this, had known it was coming, but the reality of imminent violence still sent fear coursing through her veins. Knox positioned himself on the cabin's porch, rifle ready but not raised, presenting the image of a man willing to talk but prepared to fight. Willow took her position at the side window, rifle aimed at the approaching riders, her breathing carefully controlled as Knox had taught her. Wells drew his men to a halt 50 yards from the cabin. He looked thinner than when Willow had last seen him in Boston, his once impeccable appearance now weathered by weeks on the trail, but his eyes still held the same cold calculation. "Sutherland," he called. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." "Nothing here belongs to you, Wells," Knox replied calmly. "The documents are already with the federal authorities. It's over." Wells laughed, the sound brittle in the clear mountain air. "It's only over when I say it is. The girl, then." "She's a witness. I'll need her silenced." "My wife isn't available for silencing," Knox said, his voice hardening. "You're a wanted man now, Wells. Murder of a federal deputy carries a hanging offense. Take your men and run while you still can." Wells's face contorted with rage. "Wife. You married that little," he cut himself off, visibly regaining control. "No matter. Bring her out, or we burn this place to the ground with both of you inside." From her position, Willow could see one of Wells's men circling toward the back of the cabin. She adjusted her aim, tracking him through the window. Knox had seen it too, his posture shifting slightly though his voice remained steady. "Last chance to ride away, Wells," Knox warned. "There's law coming. They'll be here by sundown." It was a bluff the nearest lawmen were days away, but delivered with such conviction that doubt flickered across Wells's face. For a moment, Willow thought he might actually consider retreating. Then one of his hired guns grew impatient, raising his rifle toward Knox. Willow didn't hesitate. Her shot struck the man in the shoulder, spinning him from his saddle with a cry of pain. Chaos erupted. Knox dove for cover as Wells, and his remaining men opened fire. Bullets splintered wood and shattered the cabin's windows. Willow kept firing methodically as Knox had taught her, focusing on accuracy rather than speed. She heard Knox's rifle crack from his position on the porch, followed by another cry of pain from one of their attackers. "Willow, move to position 2, Knox shouted above the gunfire. She retreated from the window, crouching low as she made her way to the back room where they'd created a firing position overlooking the approach to the rear door. Just as she reached it, the man who had been circling kicked in the door, his revolver sweeping the room. Willow fired twice. The first shot missed, but the second caught him in the chest. He staggered, firing wildly as he fell, his bullet grazing Willow's arm. She gasped at the burning pain but maintained her position, checking that he wouldn't rise again before turning her attention back to the main assault. The gunfire outside had intensified. Through the back window, Willow could see that one of Wells's men lay motionless on the ground. Another was using his horse for cover as he exchanged shots with Knox. Of Wells himself, there was no sign. Fear gripped her heart. Had he circled around? Was he approaching from another angle? She moved carefully back toward the main room, her wounded arm throbbing but still functional. A board creaked overhead the small loft where they stored extra supplies. Willow froze, her blood turning to ice. Someone was in the cabin with her. "I know you're down there, Miss Kincaid or Mrs. Sutherland, I suppose," Wells's voice called softly from above. "Come out now, and perhaps I'll let your cowboy live." Willow's mind raced. Wells must have accessed the loft from outside through the small window they used for ventilation. She glanced around frantically, looking for an advantage. The trapdoor to the loft began to open. In one fluid motion, Willow aimed her rifle and fired directly through the wooden floor where she calculated Wells would be standing. A howl of pain confirmed her hit, followed by a heavy thud as something or someone fell from the loft to the cabin floor. Wells lay writhing, blood spreading across his once fine coat from a wound in his thigh. His revolver had fallen several feet away. Willow trained her rifle on him, her hands remarkably steady despite the hammering of her heart. "It's over, Wells," she said, her voice stronger than she'd expected. "You've lost." His face contorted with hatred. "You stupid girl, do you think this ends with me? My partners have resources you can't imagine. They'll never stop. Your partners have already been arrested." Knox's voice came from the doorway as he entered cautiously, his rifle trained on Wells. Blood streaked Knox's left temple, but his eyes were clear and focused. "Federal marshals raided their offices last week. Daniels got word to me yesterday." Willow felt a wave of relief at the sight of Knox alive, quickly followed by shock at his words. "Why didn't you tell me?" Wanted Wells to believe he still had allies, Knox explained, moving to her side. "You're bleeding." "Just a graze," she assured him, unable to take her eyes from Wells, who had grown pale from blood loss but whose eyes still burned with malevolence. "You've ruined everything," Wells spat. "Years of work, millions in assets, my reputation, you ruined it yourself when you murdered my father," Willow replied coldly. "This is justice." Wells's hand suddenly darted to his boot, emerging with a small derringer. Before he could aim, Knox fired once. The impact threw Wells back against the wall, his eyes wide with surprise before the light in them faded forever. The silence that followed seemed deafening. Outside, the gunfire had stopped. Willow lowered her rifle, suddenly aware of how badly her arms were shaking. The others. She asked hoarsely. "Two dead, one surrendered," Knox said, gently taking the rifle from her trembling hands. "It's over, Willow, truly over." She collapsed against him then, the adrenaline draining from her body as sobs racked her frame. Knox held her tightly, his own body trembling with the aftermath of combat and fear for her safety. "You're safe," he murmured against her hair. "You and the baby both. You're safe now." Later, after Knox had tended to her wounded arm and they had secured the surviving attacker for delivery to the authorities, they sat on the cabin's porch in the fading light. The bodies had been respectfully covered and moved away from the main grounds, awaiting proper burial. "What happens now?" Willow asked softly, her head resting against Knox's shoulder. He was quiet for a moment, his arm secure around her waist. "We can go anywhere, do anything. Your father's name will be cleared. The stolen money will likely be recovered. Some might even come to you as his heir." Willow considered this. "I never cared about the money, I just wanted justice for him, and now you have it." She turned to look at Knox's profile, noting the new lines of fatigue around his eyes, the small cut at his temple where a bullet had grazed him another inch and she would have lost him forever. The thought made her hold him tighter. "I want a home," she said finally. "A real one. Not just a place of safety, but of joy. For us, for our child." Knox smiled, his hand moving to rest gently on her belly. "I promised you that once. Stay for joy and call it home, remember." Willow smiled, remembering that first day at his ranch when she had been a desperate stranger seeking only temporary shelter. "I remember. Where would this home be?" Knox asked. "Back in Boston, Wyoming, or somewhere new entirely?" Willow thought about it, considering all the possibilities now open to them. "I liked your land in Arizona," she said finally. "It was beautiful in its own way, wild but with potential, like us." Knox's eyes brightened. "We could rebuild there, better this time. Larger house for the family we're starting. Maybe add some proper fencing, more cattle. You could even start a small school eventually, teach mathematics to the ranchers' children." As he spoke, Willow could see it all unfolding, their future taking shape in words and dreams and possibilities. A home built on love rather than fear, a life chosen rather than forced upon them. "Yes," she said simply, her heart full. "That's exactly what I want." Knox kissed her then, gentle yet passionate, a promise of all that was to come. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "When I first saw you riding up to my door, covered in dust and determination, I never imagined where that moment would lead." Willow smiled, her hand coming to rest against his cheek. "From safety to joy," she whispered. "From shelter to home. From strangers to family," Knox added, his hand covering hers on her growing belly. Above them, the first stars of evening appeared in the darkening sky, witnesses to the end of one journey and the beginning of another one they would travel together, for all the days to come.